DevelopSec, Developing Security Awareness with James Jardine, brought to you by Jardine Software. All right, everyone, welcome to the DevelopSec podcast. This is your host, James Jardine, and I have a special treat for us today. Usually it's just me, but today I've got on the line Tim Medin. So welcome, Tim, to the show.
Thank you for having me, James.
Can you give us a little bit of background? I know you got a lot of stuff going on. So, tell us a little bit about what you got going on now, a little bit about you.
Sure. I am a SANS instructor. I teach some of the offensive courses with SANS. I also have my own consulting company, focus on penetration testing, red teaming, all of the offensive sorts of things. So yes. That's me in a nutshell.
We love the offensive, don't we?
Oh, absolutely.
It is so much fun.
I actually have stickers that say I am offensive. If you want one, just email me.
Yeah, I saw those. I don't know if you posted on Twitter or one of them. I saw those stickers a few times. Like, man, that's pretty nice. I like the I am offensive. So today we want to talk about Meteor. It's interestingly enough, you did a presentation on this at Bsides Orlando earlier this year, right?
It was... it's all starting to blur together because I've done this presentation a couple of times. Bsides, I guess it was Bsides Orlando this year. Yes.
Yeah, I know it was 2007.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Look, I did my research. We got this down.
I'm glad one of us knows because I clearly have no idea.
Yeah. Well, you did the presentation, and before that, last year, it was funny because I got a client that needed an app tested, and they were like, yeah, it's written in Meteor. And I was like, great. And I had never even heard of Meteor before that, to be fair. So I started doing some research, and I came across some posts that you had, actually, talking about some plugins that we'll talk about that help us out with Meteor to do it. But there's really not a lot of information about Meteor out there from a security standpoint. There's a little bit, but there's still, I think a lot of times when we use these frameworks, and I'll let you explain, because you do it in the presentation, talk a little about what Meteor is. But with these frameworks, a lot of times we just assume that a lot of stuff is taken care of for us, and what hopefully we'll get out of this when we talk about this is that there is some stuff that's taken care of for us, but not everything is as cheery as it may seem. So what is Meteor?
Sure. So Meteor is a open source. It's a JavaScript framework. It runs on top of Node.js. The biggest benefit with Meteor versus a lot of the other platforms is it's a real-time framework. The beauty with it is it allows user A to make some sort of change within the application. It gets automatically pushed to the server and then propagated to other clients. Of course, there's a lot more that's going on behind the scenes, but the framework facilitates this communication and these real-time live updates. So it's very handy if you have maybe some sort of collaborative application. It just makes life a lot easier for you to wire these events up and get these real-time updates from person to person.
Yeah, which is nice. I mean, we're seeing so many apps go so client-side heavy now, right? I mean, everything just gets sucked down to the client, and you're basically running thick clients in the browser to be able to connect back up to this. So I'm assuming it's very similar to something like SignalR, some of the other technologies, some of the other languages use, right? And what I find is interesting when I started looking at Meteor was, it's all WebSockets. Right? I mean, we're not really dealing with a lot of HTML or raw HTTP requests. We're dealing a lot of WebSockets here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's lovely because you get those real time pushes. Unfortunately, the testing tools are sort of mediocre at best.
Yeah, it's. It's funny watching it go through because, from people that test a lot, right? I mean, obviously we use proxy tools. Most of us use Burp. So that's pretty much the only one I use from a proxy standpoint. And it has the ability to view WebSockets, so it's great. But you're so used to being in HTTP land that, search is easy. Everything is simple. I can use tools like Repeater and all these different things to test my app. And then I get to WebSockets. And I can do interception, but there's not a whole lot more I could do with it. It's not as easy to take a WebSocket request and resend it up to try to test certain things, right? I got to catch it mid-flight and be able to do it. And it completely changes the game. But I got to assume from a developer standpoint, I'd be curious to know people that develop with it, how they go about testing these things, or if they're not able to test a lot of this stuff because of that reason.
Yeah, and related to that, some of the difficulty is we've got our traditional tools, so they'll look for things like cross-site scripting. So they'll send a request to the server, look for the response, look for the unsanitized input being reflected back to the client. And if you don't have a tool that's actually going to live render the data, you're going to completely miss an entire class of these vulnerabilities. So there's additional difficulty with that as well.
Are you aware of any tools that, and I'm talking like from a dynamic, because I'm assuming that's really what we're talking about here, like automated dynamic scanning that actually tests WebSockets? Because I don't know if there is one.
I can't think of anything.
I don't use a lot of the commercial tools, but it'd be interesting to know.
Same.
There's a lot of big vendors out there that'll test your app, right? You could sign up, give them a URL, they test the app. Be interesting to know how many of those would actually dig down into the WebSocket level to be able to test that, because I think it's tricky.
Oh, absolutely. And you've got the asynchronicity of, if that's a word, of these types of applications makes it additionally difficult. You have a much, at least in my mind, a much simpler flow with your traditional web applications, and it gets significantly more complicated when you start adding in WebSockets, and it's all running through some of the same sockets, or it gets all kinds of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I found when I was trying to do some testing, you think about things like username harvesting. Right, in a traditional web app, that's pretty easy to send into repeater or intruder, resend the request. It's really easy. But when you get into a Meteor app or one that's using WebSockets, I guess this could be anything with WebSockets, right? You have to change the game a little bit. I can't send it to intruder. I can't do that. My traditional methods. So like I wrote just an HTML page where I embedded JavaScript and made the WebSocket connection on my own. And then tried to parse out the results, and then you could loop through it and try to do. And we could do username harvesting, but way more difficult than it is on your traditional web app.
Right, and related to that too, some of the additional difficulty, like traditional SQL injection, every tool is written for that. When we get into the NoSQL world, some of the tools aren't quite as ready for that. Like even the NoSQL map versus SQL map kind of, if you will, it's mediocre. It's significantly more difficult. So you're dealing with WebSockets with these technologies already don't handle it, and then you're throwing on even more technologies that these tools aren't quite as good at finding issues related to it, like these NoSQL backends. And now you've got sort of two problems with these tools, and they start to stack after a while, and you start missing more and more of this.
Yeah, it's funny. You get in there and people are so used to, oh man, I'll just do single quote or one equals one, and it's like, nah, that's not going to work here. You need a whole different angle of attack when you're looking at things. Most of these are running off of like Mongo or something similar, where you don't query the same way, right? I mean, you mentioned NoSQL. Your regular SQL attacks don't work, and that throws a lot of people in a loop. And I think at the same time, it's that sort of obfuscation that then turns other people, like the development side, and they're like, oh, well, I mean, it's kind of a black box. I don't know how it works behind the scenes, but I know it's NoSQL, so it's not vulnerable to SQL injection, but I'm really not sure maybe how to test it. So we'll just assume that it's okay, that as long as we're doing what the framework says, we should be safe, right? I mean, that is probably how a lot of people approach it.
Well, and related to that, so I could agree with you more, but I joke in the presentation, and I joke about this in my classes, that the NoSQL is way more secure than the traditional. And the joke is it's only because people don't know how to write queries for it.
Right.
It's not because it is more secure. It's just people are like, yeah, I don't know what I'm doing here. My single quote, like you said, didn't work, so we're totally safe. And they have to understand it's an entire new way of testing these applications. And exactly as you said, your test cases are just simply not going to work.
Yeah, I mean, it's so different. And, we talk about some of the things that are protected by sort of default, right? Like cross-site scripting is something that there's sort of more built-in protection for from a Meteor application. Although, to be fair, I know when I've tested them, I've definitely found cross-site scripting. But what's interesting is it's usually not the typical cross-site scripting you get where it's the script alert script tags. I find usually when I identify it, it's because I can sneak in like an image tag and do on errors on bad image links, right? Or an href, and I can do JavaScript in the href.
Yep.
I'm assuming that Meteor's probably doing a better job of identifying things like the script tag, but then it lets other things like images and those type of things to be put in. Maybe that was just an oversight. Or maybe it's just that by default, it does better at certain things. I found that testing a Cold Fusion app not too long ago where a script tag was blocked, right? It would come back out and it would say, nope, invalid tag. So it would change script to invalid tag or something like that. So it wouldn't run it. But you could throw image, tags in there all day long with an on error and they would fire all day. So it's interesting to see how the frameworks try to block certain type of cross-site scripting, but they completely miss other areas of it.
Well, I had one. This is one of my favorites. The developers were looking for the angle bracket script angle, and they were just completely stripping it. So I put like angle bracket SCRI, then within that angle bracket script and angle bracket, and then PT angle bracket, and it would remove the inner, and then therefore give me the XSS with an old school script tag. And I was like, just laughing my face off. And I tell them, and then they say, okay, can you retest? So then I do it 3 layers deep the next time. So it's sort of incepted. And then it works. And I'm like, guys, do you sort of see a pattern here? I'm just going to keep adding more. Maybe you should, iterate this a little bit or fix it in a different way.
or maybe just encode your output.
Yeah.
But that's funny. That's a common example we see people give because it highlights that input validation can be difficult, right? And we overlook that. So like, how many tests do you see that go out there? People do pen tests, right? They give you the report. The recommendation is you should do input validation, output encoding. Great. My recommendation is 1 sentence. But input validation isn't as simple as we think when we talk about things like this. We're like, I'll just look for script tag, and then you remove it, and then it was embedded inside another script tag, And I always laugh because all I see when we talk about that is the Sesame Street, where you're moving the 2 words together slowly across. So you pulled it out, and then they just slide together, and they make that script tag, and now you're vulnerable to it. It's just funny to me to think about it like that, but that's exactly what you're doing.
Well, it's so hard. People try to roll their own, and I'm sure you probably mentioned on the podcast a number of times. Don't ever try to roll your own here. There are great libraries that will do this type of thing for you. Of course, I shouldn't say simple. The best answer is whitelist. If you're asking for someone's name, there's only a certain subset of characters that are going to be valid in a person's name, right? We got alphabetic characters and maybe a single quote for O'Brien, and that's about it. So only accept those. Now, some other fields, of course, get much, much, much more complicated, and it can be much more difficult. But then you can focus on those a little bit differently.
Right. Yeah. And that's one of the things I push a lot. Talking about like the input validation, and then of course focusing even more on output encoding for that situation, right? Like when we're talking about cross-site scripting, is that output encoding to help protect that code. So there's also, which I don't know if you mentioned in there or not, but the idea of cross-site WebSocket hijacking. Have you done much with that or looked at it?
Honestly, no, not really.
No, okay. I wasn't sure.
That's not the answer you're expecting.
No, actually, it kind of was because you didn't mention it in there. But what I find interesting, and that's kind of what was happening with my username harvesting script that I put together, right, was I'm going to build my own web page, and I'm going to call WebSockets on your site. And it works. And so what a lot of people don't realize is that, at least last year when I tested, and I'm actually testing right now, not while we're podcasting, but I'm doing a test right now that's a Meteor app. And, the ability to be able to, from your own page, write requests and connect to WebSockets on another site, right? Just like cross-site request forgery, a lot of times they use cookies back and forth. The WebSockets do, even though Burp doesn't show you the cookies in the stupid viewer. But they're sending the cookies back and forth. So you can actually make connections to another domain through WebSockets, because WebSockets typically don't support CORS or the same origin policy or anything like that, which makes it difficult, so you can actually at times be able to write connections. Now, it doesn't work for everything. It was very wishy-washy on it when I did it. Unauthenticated definitely worked better than authenticated. We'll just leave it at that. But another one of those things to kind of consider, hey, are you checking that the user's coming from the site you're expecting? But it's something that unless they changed it with Meteor, it was something you actually had to do yourself. The developer had to write a check to say, hey, is this coming from our domain, or is this, coming from some other site, and how are we going to handle that to be able to deal with it? So another kind of interesting vulnerability we see there. So we talk about testing and the ability to go in and see this information. You talked about how it's real time. Somebody updates data, it comes sent down automatically. One of the tools I found most useful during the testing I did was Meteor Minor. So talk a little bit about what Meteor Minor is.
Sure. Before we get into that, let me explain a little bit more about the framework and some of the basics and how it works, and then we'll talk about Meteor Minor and how we can use that to manipulate and extract data. So one of the features with Meteor is I'm going to make an update to a local database, a mini Mongo database in my browser. It gets pushed back to the server, it accepts or rejects the change, and then notifies all of the clients that are subscribed to that information. So the clients are going to subscribe to specific data, and the server will publish that data. So if you and I are looking at the same information, we'll both have a subscription to the published data on the server. And that's going to sit in, like I said, a local database, if you will, within the browser. Well, if that server pushes too much data, because what you could have, let's say I look up my user information, and on the web page it shows first name, last name, company, whatever. And then on your page you see the same sort of thing. Well, the server, what it could have done is sent more information about me. So not just my first name, my last name, and my company, but potentially could have sent my credentials, like a password hash, right, or other sensitive information. You don't see it in the browser. No tool is going to extract it out of the visibility, what you see on the screen, but it has still been sent to the client. And what we can do is we can use like the JavaScript console, and we can look at those mini Mongo databases. We can also we have the opportunity to manipulate the subscription. So I say, I want to get information for my user ID. What I could maybe do is I could try another user ID, or I can try to say user ID greater than 0 to get all of the users. So I can do some sort of SQL injection that way. So what the goal is with Meteor Minor is I want to be able to see what are those publications, what are those, what am I subscribing to on the client from the client, and what data is sent to the server, so maybe I can manipulate that. Going back to the user scenario, maybe I push my ID, but I can see now in Meteor Minor that an ID is sent up to the server, and maybe I can change that and say, I want all user IDs, where the ID is greater than 0. I give it an expression instead of a value. Also, I can look at the data, so I can look at those mini Mongo collections within my browser, and I can see, hey, what's inside these. And one of the features, because what this ultimately spawns from is, with Sans, I was the chief developer for NetWars, and I wanted to have a platform where users could work together on a team. They would get real-time updates. The scoreboard in the front would get updates, and I didn't want to wire this myself. But I also wanted to see, what am I sending to the client? Am I sending too much data? Because I don't want to miss those things. It's really easy to make, this sort of the joke. It's really easy to make an application that I can't hack. But when you're in a room full of hackers, the challenge has got significantly more difficult. Right. So I wanted some visibility and say, what am I actually doing right now? What is actually being sent to the client? Did I set something up in a test scenario? So one of the nice features is when you get data from the server in a collection, it will show you the different shapes of that data, if you will. So let's say I'm looking at the list of the players in the game, and I'll see in the like scorers collection, I'll see their name, their display name, their score, and some other information. But maybe with my score, I'll have additional information. And what Meteor Minor will do is it'll show you those different shapes. It'll say, hey, there's one that's got three fields, and another that has 10, let's say. So we can then try to figure out, okay, what's different about the one with the 10 fields? Or maybe something else shows up and there's extra fields in another. And it will also actually highlight as new data shows up to show you deltas as you interact with the page. So you can say, oh, I clicked on this, something just happened. Let's try to figure out exactly what happened.
Yeah, what I found interesting with it is, you can toggle the list of collections, basically all the tables that come down. And, whether there's data in them, a number of rows in each one. So from a testing tool, even not from necessarily a hacking tool, but even, developers just testing their Meteor apps, QA testing these apps, being able to see, hey, I did something, what fields came down? Did I just get pushed the entire database, or did I get pushed just the stuff that I wanted to get pushed? And one of the things that I'll do with it is, you list out all the routes. So for things like authorization or authentication checks, I'll sit there before the client even gives me credentials. They give me the URL. I'll hit the URL. It lists out all the routes that it sees, and then I'll just sit there and start plugging those routes into the URL. And I'm trying to hit every one to see, like, hey, is this going to let me in without being logged in or not? But otherwise you don't see it, because again, this isn't like a typical HTTP app where I can go into Burp and look at the target tab and see everything that it sees. It's probably not going to spider it like it normally would, right? All the crawling functionality is gone, but you get this, and it's like, oh yeah, you've got a route that's /account. You've got one that's /account, and it takes this parameter, and it just pulls all this information in, so you can start saying, all right, well, let me see if I can get to this one. And I'm pretty sure you can actually click on the route in there, and it'll try to take you to it.
Yep.
So just kind of really slick tool that if you're doing anything with Meteor, in my opinion, if you're not using this, you're crazy.
Yeah, and the route thing is interesting because people are like, well, why does the client know about all of these different URLs, all these different paths, right? These routes. Why does the client well, it's for speed. You want your end user to have a very speedy, very quick, very prompt experience. So the client needs to understand, where can I go next? What data is in this route should I use? So you click on the little thing in Meteor Minor. It shows you all the possible routes, and you don't have to run something like Dirbuster to figure out what's available to you, because the client has to know.
Right.
It's a beautiful thing. Now, of course, that depends on how the application is written. If you have like a one-page Meteor app, that's not going to work because, well, it's one page. And I've specifically implemented Meteor Minor using Iron Router. There are some other routing technologies associated with Meteor, but I picked one of the more popular ones.
Yeah, and so, for those that are interested, I'm going to have hopefully some information. I'll try to find the link for that, too, to put it in there. But it runs through TamperMonkey, right? So it's just a user script you download, load it into TamperMonkey, which is a extension for Firefox or Chrome. I do my testing in Firefox, but it works really well, and it automatically knows. Like, if it's a Meteor app, you'll see it pop up on the right-hand side. Here's all your information. If it's not, you don't even know it's there, which is really cool because it also helps you identify, oh, this is a Meteor app, which somebody may not be able to do just by looking at the app. It makes it really interesting to be able to get in there and manipulate that. And, just like every other app that's out there, the same type of flaws. We talk cross-site scripting, those type of things. That obviously the information leakage of, hey, you just published your entire table when you should have only published information for that user in these fields. We also have things like authorization issues. You manipulate traffic just like you do any other app. I intercept the request, identify like, oh, I'm adding a new user, and it puts a specific organization ID as a parameter, and it's an int. So I'm going to intercept that request. I'm going to change it to another one and see if I can add to another company or something. all these things we still do, even though it's a Meteor app, to try to test those things. And I don't know if a lot of people overlook that because of kind of how obfuscated Meteor really is.
Yeah, and what I've also written, I've written Meteor Minor, but I also wrote a test application that you can play with some of this. If you haven't played with Meteor, if you're trying, because the problem is oftentimes like, oh, cool, I want to try this tool. Where do I try it? Right. So I wrote a tool, Meteor To-Dos Goat. So the Hello World application, if you will, for the Meteor world is a to-do application where I can create to-do list, add things to the to-do list and such. So I created Meteor's To-Do Goat, riffing off of the OWASP Goat theme for the vulnerable applications, where it has some of these vulnerabilities. And you can also see it once you get the tool installed. You'll see as you click around inside the application, you can see, hey, look, additional records just came down. Hey, these records are of different shapes. Let's take a look at them in the JavaScript console or whatever. I don't have a tremendous amount of documentation yet at this point. I need to add some more to it. But if you want to access either of those, it is GitHub/Nidem. So it's my last name spelled backwards. That's November, India, Delta, Echo, Mike. So Nidem. And you'll see Meteor To-Dos Goat.
Man, so sneaky on
and Meteor Minor. Yeah.
So sneaky on the naming of that. I'll put that in the notes too as
cool.
well, where to get that. So it's easier just to click the link. Because it's interesting to see how those things work. Now, I talked to you briefly about this. I remember we chatted about it last year because I was like, man, I loaded this thing up. It was in a test VM, and for some reason, the WebSocket data was encrypted. I don't know I still don't know what's wrong with that machine. I've got two machines that do it. And it terrified me. I knew this test was coming up, and I knew my main machine worked fine. And I was like, do I update to High Sierra? Like, what do I do here? Because it blows my mind. And I talked to somebody else, they've had the same problem. Is that I have my test VM, I loaded Meteor onto I loaded all this stuff. Right? It's a garbage VM. So to be fair on that one, I don't know what's causing it. But I load up Burp, and I load up your to-dos Goat, right? And sure enough, I'm like, man, this data, I can't see any of the data. It's all encrypted. Like, what is he talking about? You can manipulate this. And I'm like, but this is weird. But I get assigned this test, and I'm like, oh man, this is going to be bad, right? Like, I can't see any of the data. How good is this test going to go? And I load it up on my main testing machine, and sure enough, I can see everything. I can intercept it, and I can manipulate it. And so I did do some testing around. Like, I've got a Mac Mini that encrypts the WebSockets. I don't know what's encrypting them. I don't know why it does it. And I've got a Ubuntu virtual machine that does it. I've got a MacBook Pro, it doesn't do it. And I loaded up a brand new Ubuntu image with nothing on it, and it doesn't do it. So I don't know what does it, but I will tell you, I don't add any new development stuff on this one machine. Because that other one, like, I was loading Node, I was loading all kinds of stuff. So I don't know if I loaded something that somehow says, oh, if this is loaded, we'll go ahead and encrypt that traffic for you. I don't know. But so just just a word of caution to anybody, if you do go out and get this and you start playing with it, the data should be in clear text when you look at WebSockets and Burp. If it's not, load yourself a brand new VM. Don't load anything else on it. I don't know why it's encrypted, but it shouldn't be. It's just weird. And I know you said you'd never seen that before.
Yeah, that is odd. And just additional clarification, what James is talking about, looking at the traffic in flight. Inside the browser, of course, it's not going to be encrypted unless they're doing something weird inside the application. Right. But if you access those collections locally, you're not going to see that. So even if you can't figure out a way to decrypt it in flight, you're still going to have it decrypted at rest in that mini Mongo databases, and everything is going to work just fine. Yep.
Yeah. So that's just in Burp when I'm looking at the WebSocket history, the traffic there. It's encrypted, and it's weird. But, that also highlights an interesting point. We didn't cover it a lot. You did mention it, but, a lot of what you do when you're dealing with Meteor is with the JavaScript console in the browser. The amount of stuff that you can access through there and attempt manipulating your databases directly through that. So bypassing stuff. So there's a lot of stuff that you do. It completely changes the way that you look at testing the app from your typical app. I don't know of another technology that works as similar to this, as what we have that just completely changes how you test. I mean, we've got so many front ends. We talk about React and Angular and all these different things. And they changed a little bit, but they don't change it anywhere near what Meteor's doing.
Yeah, frankly, I wrote this tool as because I was a developer. I was writing the framework or the engine for NetWars, and I just needed a way to test stuff, and I just got tired of trying to figure out how to test this and typing the commands over and over in the JavaScript console. I'm like, I just want flashy thing off to the right, and of course I put it green on black so it looks super neat, right? But at that point, after I started using it for my testing, I could also use it for my development and sort of acceptance testings. Then I'm like, you know what? We can also use this for security testing, right? I can look at, hey, is too much data being sent down? Because those two are very much two sides of the same coin.
Right. Which, it's the same thing I talk. We were talking before this, and I'm saying, I'm doing a training class for a QA group, and this is what I talk when I do my presentations, and I say, look, just because we flag something as a security tool, and probably most people would see Meteor Minor as, a security tool, at least the groups we run in, but they're developer tools as well. Fiddler for a proxy for Microsoft Windows, right, is a developer tool. It's a debugger, which is the same idea as what Meteor Minor is. It's a debugging tool. It's a way for you to be able to look at your app and see what's going on. We've just twisted it in the security industry and said, oh, well, great, I can use that to do this. But they were all tools that we could use in development and QA and those areas. And to me, the more of those tools you can be armed with to help you out, start off using them as debugging tools. And then once you understand how to use them, then we can start kind of shifting it and saying, hey, here's how we use this as a security tool. But it's still you using that same tool to be able to go in and assess your apps and figure those things out and understand what's going back and forth and how they work together.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the security aspect of the test. It's actually like a subset, if you will, of the overall acceptance testings for an application, right? You're going to be testing for functionality. As a security person, we don't care if the user has a bad experience so much, right? That's not our purview. But we're looking for those security problems, which is what you're looking for when you're developing or when you're doing some of your security testing as well.
Right, exactly. And I say that all the time, that it's a subset of QA, right?
Yep.
We've been saying this for years. It's a subset of QA that, look, I don't care if you have a missing period. Although I say I don't care if you have a missing period, funny enough, in my training class, the username harvesting that happened on the login screen was due to a message that one had a period and one didn't. So,
I've seen that exact same thing. Literally that exact same thing. The period versus not. It was the exact same message, but the period was different.
The period was the period was
not
missing.
Even joking. Yep.
And I'm sitting there looking through it, and it's funny because, like you said, typically I don't care about your spelling mistakes. I don't care about that. But there are actually some locations where it does matter. From a security perspective, but it's true, right? We're not looking for that type of thing. Look, if you can use the app and you try to do a calculation, the calculation's wrong, that's a QA issue. But if I can do something with that calculation to make it benefit me, well, now all of a sudden it's a security. But in reality, it's a quality issue, and
right.
It's just getting people to understand. And look at it a little differently. And that's what I try to teach people when we're talking through the podcast, when I do my training sessions. It's no different, really, than what we're doing. It's, hey, I see an integer. Let me change the number and see if I can access another user's account. That's a QA issue. We call it security. We tag it security. There's a whole other group of the organization that wants to claim access and responsibility for it. But it's a QA issue, right? The app should be set up. I can't view your account. I can view my account. And just making people more aware of those things, and honestly, a lot of times how simple it is to test for them. Yep. And how to build those tests in is important. And that's, why I want to talk about Meteor today. Be honest, I got one client that has a Meteor app. I've not come across any other Meteor apps that need testing. So I don't know how prevalent. I know in your talk you mentioned that their site, I think, lists it as the most used, or what did they call it in your presentation?
It was on GitHub had it rated as it was the most starred JavaScript framework. I'm trying to find the link. I have a screenshot in my presentation.
Yeah.
But I can't for the life of me seem to find.
But actually finding places that use it seems kind of tough. So, I mean, if anybody out there listening is using it, hopefully this is really helpful for you. And we do have people that listen that are, on the pen testing side, the security side. So if you run across this, hopefully this information will be helpful to help you test these apps, because there's so many different things out there. I try to tell people this too, that there's so many different languages, there's so many different frameworks, all this new stuff is coming out. It's hard even in security to try to keep up with all these different frameworks. So when you come across something new, if somebody else has already found some information, let's share it out and help us test this, because we don't want to get across where people send out new stuff. Hey, I'm working on this new language. There's no information on security for it. It must be secure. And they, just pound out some code, and then somebody figures out, hey, wait, you got to do this and you got to do that, and there's a couple different things like messing with auto publish. Some settings in there with Meteor that you want to make sure are configured properly so you don't dump your whole database. This is our opportunity to share that information.
Well, and that too, while there might not be a lot of Meteor applications out there now, it seems like people are really liking this framework. So we might see some coming in the future. So it'd be nice from a personal development point of view, maybe to stay ahead of that curve. And when one shows up, you're like, oh, I got this because I played with it a little bit.
Yeah, well, there's nothing like loading up the new technology like this and playing with it, because they've got some cool tutorials. That's what I do is it's cool that we have the Meteor to-dos GOAT, right? Something that's built up that we know is vulnerable. But I like to just go find the tutorials for it, download it, load it onto a virtual machine, and build one of the tutorial apps and walk through it and then start testing some of this stuff. I find a great way of learning how different things work. And when I'm doing testing for clients, when I see something, I know what it is, right? I can stick it to something else. If you look at something where you're doing PHP with Flask, right, and you get the session ID back, you can look at it and be like, oh, yeah, that session ID is built a certain way. I know we're using this on the back end. And it's amazing how much information you can build up just by loading up simple to-do apps or these tutorial apps and just looking at the data. Oh, I just added session management. What does my cookie look like when it comes down? What do they do with that cookie by default? And same thing here with Meteor. It's just definitely a lot to be desired, I think, from a testing standpoint for Meteor in general. Outside of, having cool things like Meteor Minor work great, and fortunately Burp does have okay support for it, that we can intercept it, we can see it. But it is definitely a lot more trying and it requires a lot more patience than our typical HTTP, HTTPS apps. And what I started doing, I actually created a custom filter in Burp in my WebSocket history to remove the ping and the pongs because they drive me nuts.
Yeah.
When you get in and start working with things with WebSockets, they send these stupid pings back and forth, right, to see, hey, is there anything new, whatever's going on. So it's got these ping and pongs going back and forth. And unlike HTTP history, where you can see much more about the request, I know what page it went to. Basically, what you get is ingoing and outgoing as a message. And then you have to click on each one in the history to see what it actually was. And so you get, if you don't do anything for a while, you just get inundated with these ping and pongs sitting in there. And you're like, oh, come on, really? So I did a negative filter to get rid of the ping and the pongs. Just to help clean that up just a little bit for me, to make it just a smidge easier going in there. So, look, I appreciate it, man. It's been a long time, from our time when I taught at SANS as well. So it's always good catching up. Always fun when it's a newer topic, not necessarily newer, but a topic like this where you don't really hear a lot of people talking much about it. So I really appreciate you taking the time and coming on to the show.
Sure. Thanks for having me. If you want to reach out to me, hit me up on Twitter. It's I'm sure James might have a link because no one's going to spell my name right. Or tim@redsiege.com. Drop me an email.
Nobody's going to spell your name right. But
oh, my gosh. No one gets my name right. The ironic thing is it must be a language thing. But when I get like a robocall or whatever, people of Indian descent nail my name every single time. I think it's a language thing, like because Medin is not going to be spelled Medin in typical American English. I get Medin. People add extra letters in. I get Medlin because they see a D and an I next to each other, and they add another vertical line. So I can filter all those calls out. But when somebody pronounces my name right, I'm like, you must know who I am. And for some reason, a language thing, the Swedes pronounce it. It's a Swedish descent of a name, so they always get it right. And for some reason, people from India get it right all the time too.
Well, it's funny because we had this conversation. Was it DerbyCon a couple of years ago? It might have been. We were sitting at the house, I'm pretty sure, and I was like, "So what is it?" I said, "Is it Medin? Is it what?" And you were like, "It's Medin." And I was like, "All right, well, that's funky, but." Because I swear, like, every time I talk to Kevin, I was like, yeah, Tim Medin, Oh,
he never gets it right.
He never gets it right either. And then you said it. Well, and it's funny, though, because my name with Jardine, right, but it's I-N-E.
Right.
And, and so I guess I look at it like that. And that's why I was always like, it must be Medin. And sure enough, we were wrong. But now I know, and it makes it much easier.
That's okay. Everyone still gets it wrong. Like, I literally, when I first met my wife, she was arguing with me about how I pronounce my name, and I'm like, no, I've pretty much been doing this my entire life. I think I know how it's pronounced. The ironic thing is, my great-great-grandfather changed our last name from Gustafson to Medin, so it would be more American, and no Americans pronounce it right.
That is awesome.
No one would have gotten Gustafson wrong.
Right. That they wouldn't be able to spell it, but they at least would have. Pronounced it properly.
Yeah, exactly.
That is awesome. Well, I definitely appreciate you coming on. Everybody, thanks for listening. As usual, you can reach out. You can get us at Twitter at DevelopSec, or you can reach out to me at james@developsec.com. Share your comments. If you're not a member of the Slack channel, feel free to send me an email. I'll invite you into it. We have conversations, talk about AppSec in there. And again, appreciate you listening. We'll talk to you on the next episode.
You have been listening to the DevelopSec podcast with James Jardine. Follow us on Twitter at DevelopSec and visit our website at www.developsec.com for more episodes and information.